Hi, this is Ed Fitzpatrick. If you enjoy local politics as much as I do, be sure to join our friends at Rhode Island PBS for the show A Lively Experiment. Hosted by Jim Hummel, the weekly series features journalists, pundits, and politicians debating the stories and issues that matter most to us Rhode Islanders. Tune in to A Lively Experiment and be part of the conversation. Fridays at 7 p.m. on Rhode Island PBS and wherever you get your podcasts. From the Boston Globe, this is Rhode Island Report. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. Welcome back to the podcast where we bring you big conversations from our very small state. Today marks the start of the legislative session. I'm here with my colleagues Steph Machado and Jim Hummel, the host of A Lively Experiment on Rhode Island PBS, to talk about what we can expect. Steph Machado, Jim Hummel, Happy New Year, and thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Ed.
Happy New Year.
So we always get some news when we sit down with the House and Senate leaders to preview the legislative session. And this year, one of the biggest pieces of news was that Senate President Dominic Ruggiero is now open to a ban on assault-style weapons. So, Steph, what is Ruggiero's record on gun legislation, and what's he said about an assault weapons ban in the past?
Yeah, Senate President Ruggiero has always been a Second Amendment guy, as he's referred to himself. He had an A rating from the NRA, but that changed to an F after the legislature passed a ban on high-capacity magazines a few years ago. But the assault weapons ban has been something he has always opposed. He has said that it would be better to do it on the federal level. There was a federal assault weapons ban that expired 20 years ago. But this year, he's now saying that was his former position. So he hasn't come out in favor of an assault weapons ban, but it sounds like he perhaps is more open to it, or at least wouldn't block it from getting a vote. We've seen him in the past allow issues to get, like the abortion rights bill, for example. He allowed that to get a vote on the floor, even though he voted no. So it'll be interesting to see if that ends up passing this year.
And Senator Lou DePalma, who said of the Finance Committee, said if it goes to the floor, it'll pass. They believe they have the vote. So that's the key. And it's always been that way, even going back to Nick Mattiello and before when he was House Speaker.
Yeah, the drama could be, does it get out of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, it's going to be in the governor's budget. The governor has said he's going to put it in the budget.
Oh,
and
it could
so,
be in finance.
So it could be in finance. Sometimes there's a standalone bill and it's in the budget.
Yeah.
But if it's in the budget, they can't not vote on the budget, right? So they would have to either amend the budget to get rid of it, which is a bigger deal than just ignoring the standalone bill, if that makes sense.
Jim, why do you think Ruggiero is open to this idea this year when he's been against it in the past?
Well, look, nobody said it on the record, but he was in a fight for his presidency. This year, Ryan Pearson decided to, the former majority leader decided to challenge him. So did he make a deal maybe with the progressives? Nobody's saying that on the record, but you know the way this state works. It's give me this and I'll give you that. So he could be softening maybe in his old age, but I think the skeptic in me says there may have been a little pressure in the, they count votes leading up to the vote. And if some of the progressives said, would you be amenable to this? He said, yeah, we can talk about it.
And isn't Senator Valerie Lawson, the new majority leader, Steph, isn't she in favor of the assault weapons ban?
I believe so. And she has said that there are many issues in which she disagrees with the Senate president. And so she's sort of this emerging, major player at the State House right now.
So Senator Lawson had been the Democratic majority whip. Who's the new whip that has replaced her?
So Senator David Tukoyan has been named the whip, the number 3 position in the Senate. He's a Democrat from Smithfield. It's only his second term in the Senate. He's a longtime police officer. He was in the state police for more than 20 years, and then he was chief of the North Providence Police Department, and he currently works at the Providence Water Supply Board.
Another big takeaway from the session preview interviews was House Speaker Joe Shekarchi saying he's aware of a number of locations that have been pitched to Hasbro in an attempt to keep the toy company in Rhode Island. Steph, tell us what our colleagues Alexa Gagas and Dan McGowan found out about those sites.
Yeah, well, it seems the state is sort of pulling out all the stops, trying to do anything they can to keep Hasbro in Rhode Island. The potential locations include the Apex building in Pawtucket, the 195 land, that the spot that was supposed to be the Fane Tower. They've offered to them for $1. There could be something in the mall, like the Macy's store if Macy's leaves the mall. The old Providence Fruit and Produce Warehouse Company on Harris Avenue, the old Citizens Bank in Cranston. So we'll see. It does seem like, based on Alexa's reporting, that Hasbro is thinking it's more likely than not that they're going to leave the state, but certainly state leaders are trying to do everything they can to keep the company here.
Free Dells outside the headquarters maybe every Friday. The governor could send the truck down. He could scoop it out a little bit himself. Extra lemons in the Dells.
Sure. Yeah, Jim, what do you think are the chances that Hasbro leaves Pawtucket for Boston?
If I was a betting man, I would not put money on them to stay in Rhode Island. And I think the thing that Sakarchi said in your interview and other interviews is that they haven't even asked for, I mean, if you want something, you're going to put it out there.
Yeah, what should we make of the fact that they have not hired a lobbyist?
That's telling. That is telling. So I think that'll be a big story in the first 6 months. The thing I don't understand for all the loyal people who have worked for Hasbro here, I know we're in a different world with telecommuting and working at home, but what are the chances of people actually who are working in Rhode Island going to move to Boston or want to commute to Boston? I think they're going to lose some of their workforce if that happens.
Well, and I wonder if people are going to continue to live here because it's less expensive. Even if their job moves to Boston, there's a train. There's a train station in Pawtucket now that can take you to Boston. I mean, there are lots of people with jobs in Boston that choose to live in Rhode Island because it's a little bit less expensive.
But they're talking about whether they can get flights to the West Coast is their priority, right? Because they have so many employees now who are customers maybe in Singapore and other locations around the world. Because it's not the monopoly company anymore, is it?
No, it's definitely, they're more focused on gaming, movies, things like that.
Yep. So the Senate will reconvene today, Tuesday, January 7th, in the wake of a leadership battle that saw Dominic Ruggiero beat back a challenge, as you mentioned, Jim, from former Senate Majority Leader Ryan Pearson. When we asked Ruggiero about that, he said, I wasn't offended at all. I've been around a while. These things happen.
Please.
Jim, do you believe
Come on,
that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that is the reason that Ryan Pearson got put in Siberia initially, that he made that now infamous visit. He thought it was benign to Ruggiero's home. Ruggiero took great umbrage that he'd be questioning his leadership authority. And I think Pearson was, I don't know, of course we weren't in that conversation, but I think he was thinking, look, we got a session coming up. We've got a lot of big issues. How engaged are you going to be? Do you need me to take on a little bit more? And that offended Ruggiero. But now we know in retrospect from talking to some of the senators, that was a big problem during the session. Ruggiero was checked out for a lot of it. So what was the chain of command? Who's making the decisions? And does that open up the vacuum of leadership for the House to step in? And I think if you gave some truth serum to a lot of the senators, they would say it was a bit chaotic in the session last year. So I don't believe that at all. I think there was hard feelings. How it's going to work going forward with Val Lawson, we'll see.
So I recently reported that senators say the chairwomen of 2 key Senate committees will be replaced after they backed Senator Pearson's failed attempt to oust Senate President Ruggiero. Steph, tell us a bit about that.
So this is all subject to change. There's a lot of moving parts, but Senator Don Oyer and Senator Alana DiMario both voted against the Senate president to continue leading the chamber, and so they are both expected to lose their chair positions. Senator Oyer had chaired the Judiciary Committee. She's expected to be replaced by Senator Matthew LaMountain, according to your reporting, Ed. And Senator DiMario is expected to be replaced by Senator Susan Sosnowski to chair the Environment and Agriculture Committee. Senator Oyer told you, Ed, that she already was told that she has lost her parking spot and her office. And then the Senate Education Committee was also open because of the resignation of Chairwoman Sandra Cano, and that position is expected to go to Senator Hannah Gallo.
Jim, Senator Ruggiero is 76, and he missed parts of the last session while fighting cancer and shingles. How much of a factor will his health be in the coming legislative session?
Well, I think it's going to be big. He has said that he's had cancer. We don't know what type. We don't know the treatment, nor should we. On the other side, he is a public official, and he's a major player in this state. All of us who have known people with cancer know that there's no predictable path. I knew somebody last year who had pancreatic cancer, seemed to be doing well, and then took a turn. So we wish the best for the Senate president, but now that his health is an issue, I think it's going to be an ongoing issue.
Steph, Senator Ruggiero has said he has no plans to hand off the presidency in the middle of a term, but who do you see as a potential successor to Ruggiero as leader of the Senate at some point.
Yeah, and he mentioned that he got a handoff from Teresa Paiva-Weed, who stepped down in the middle of a term when he became Senate president. So he's sort of acknowledging that that was a little bit unpopular or controversial, and so he doesn't want to just resign and hand it off to Senator Lawson. However, I do think she's the successor at the moment. She received almost unanimous support for Majority Leader at the caucus, certainly got more votes than Senate President Ruggiero did to be Senate President. And she does seem like the successor at the moment. 2 years ago, we would have said it was Ryan Pearson. So anything can change, and we'll see how long Ruggiero decides to stay Senate President and decides to stay a senator.
So, Jim, what do you expect the Assembly to do about truck tolls?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it, Ed? So for people who may be not paying attention before Christmas, the courts have now said, unless there's going to be another appeal, they've basically said that the state can start tolling, but it can't put a cap on local trucks. And that was supposed to take care of the local businesses. So now I think the General Assembly and the governor have to work together. I think the tolls are going to come back. Heaven knows they need the money, and they're always looking for a new revenue source. So this is like music to their ears to be able to get potentially tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The question is, how much is it going to hurt local trucks? So, they had the higher cap for out-of-state trucks going through, which they liked, and then lower for the ones that are going back and forth in Rhode Island. There's been talk way, way back. Everybody said, well, they're going to toll cars. I don't think that's going to happen in a million years.
Yeah, Steph, what do you think? Will we ever see a day when they toll cars? And what did the Assembly leaders say about that?
Who knows? But the current leaders of the House and Senate say absolutely not. They have no plans to toll cars as long as they are in charge. The Speaker, the Senate President, and the two majority leaders both said no to tolling cars. Obviously, the infrastructure's there. The gantries are up. So that's why it's always a question. Could this be expanded to passenger cars? It's incredibly unpopular. I'm sure whoever proposes it will, lose their next election. So it doesn't seem like something that's very likely.
We'll have more after a quick break. When you want to go beyond the headlines, let me recommend Rhode Island PBS Weekly. Rhode Island PBS Weekly is an award-winning news magazine broadcast that gives you the full story, powered by investigative journalism and narrative storytelling. New episodes of Rhode Island PBS Weekly drop Sundays at 7:30 p.m. on Rhode Island PBS. Watch past episodes at ripbs.org/weekly. That's ripbs.org/weekly. So now let's talk about the cyber attack on the state's public benefits system, R.I. Bridges. Steph, when we talked with him, Speaker Shekarchi said he had no comment on whether the state should still be working with Deloitte, given its role in the botched 2016 rollout of that UHIP benefit system. But he said Attorney General Peter Nerona was, quote, working on a plan. What did Nerona's office tell us about that plan?
Yeah, so before the holidays, the Attorney General's office told me that they were going to pursue, quote, any and all legal actions against Deloitte because of this cyber attack that's affected more than half of Rhode Islanders at this point. And they said that they've taken preliminary steps. They've notified Deloitte of their, quote, obligation to preserve information and documents, which is sort of like an ominous warning that we're going to sue you. No updates yet on whether that legal action is coming imminently as we tape this on the 2nd of January, but we'll be following that closely.
The numbers stood out to me, 650,000 people. That's like 2/3 of the state. Yeah. So they've clarified that that's past, present, anyone who was in that system. They're just shy of 50,000 people with Health Source Rhode Island, so it all adds up to that.
Right, because you could have applied for benefits 5 years ago and you were rejected. You never even got benefits. You still potentially had your data compromised.
What really bothers me about the governor's approach on this is he held a press conference on the Monday before New Year's. And basically, it's the same old thing we heard with the bridge. Well, we really can't talk about that. And in this case, it was, well, you'll have to talk to Deloitte about this. Where's the Deloitte representative?
Yeah.
If you're going to pass it off, then say, please take the mic. Well, you think any Deloitte person's going to pick up the phone and say, oh, yeah, we'd be happy to tell you all about the negotiations. So the governor makes it sound like he's Mickey the Dope. Oh, I really don't know. about the ransom, and I can't answer that. Deloitte's handling all that. The state has got to be in. And if they're not involved in those conversations, that's a big deal too. So I don't think it's a good look for the governor to basically put it all on Deloitte, the one that he hired and then hired originally under Gina Raimondo and re-upped the contract twice. The buck has got to stop somewhere. And I thought the governor it was a bad look at that press conference.
And the governor can get Deloitte to the stateroom for the press conference, right?
Of course. I mean, how many hundreds of millions of dollars have we paid them over the years? Hey, buddy, come and stand next to me and take some of the heat because it was your firewall that they hacked.
Senate President Ruggiero said that he was not happy that Deloitte got re-upped for that contract. He thought that was a mistake. So I think we could see some...
Well, the second time. It
That's
was
what
quietly
I mean.
earlier this year that there was no discussion about it.
The hackers said that Deloitte didn't have, I know they're criminals, but they're saying a lot of the basic precautions were not up there on the website. We'll have to see.
Well, and that's my question, and I think that that's what we're going to hopefully continue to learn in the coming weeks and months, is what was the cybersecurity prior to this attack? Had it been shored up? And you reported, Ed, that the Auditor General had warned about the cybersecurity. And I reported for a long time about this hack that happened in the city of Providence, again, by a ransomware group. My question is, why did the state not look at that cyber attack, which affected tens of thousands of people, and not say, gosh, we need to make sure that our systems that have hundreds of thousands of people's social security numbers are completely hack-proof?
And the state auditor general's report said it was in part an issue of resources. So it goes back to the assembly and the governor to propose, but the assembly to provide those resources, the money to improve the system. So switching topics, Jim, what's the latest on the state budget deficit and what do you expect the assembly to do about it?
That's a great question. It's a moving target. Revenue Estimating Conference in November came in with a little bit more money. So I think we're looking at anything from $250 million to upwards of $400 million this year. It's going to get only worse in the out years. The reality is the budget's gone up 50% since 2018. And we all thought it was going to come back once the COVID money flushed out. And the question is, are they going to make the hard decisions this year? And if history is any indicator, I don't have confidence in that. Last year, the governor proposed a budget of approximately $13.5 billion. And what did the legislature do? Instead of saying, okay, we'll fund it at that level, they added $250 million, $250 million up and over. And they've got to know that's baked in. You start with that next year. I think in retrospect, when we look at this, Speaker Sicarci said when he got the COVID money, he wanted investments and not spending. And I think what happened on both ends with the governor and the legislature, we saw not one-time expenditures, but baked in that have to be reauthorized the next year, and that's why the budget's so high. So the short answer to your question is it'll be interesting to see what happens with that House finance budget when it comes out on the mimeograph machine at
hot off the presses.
11:50 on the night before they're going to vote on it.
Steph, do you expect another attempt to raise the income tax rate for the richest Rhode Islanders, raise revenue as opposed to cutting expenses?
I'm sure someone will introduce it. It's a bill that comes around from rank and file members all the time, but it doesn't seem to have a lot of support from the leaders. Senate President Ruggiero in particular said, I want more millionaires to move here.
And Massachusetts has a millionaires tax. Do you think that will...
I think that, you have a greater base up there. Yeah. I think there's been mixed feelings on that. I do know there are some legislators looking at the inheritance tax. Alan Hassenfeld is no longer a Rhode Island resident, and if there was anybody who was more Rhode Island, it's the Hassenfelds. John Hazenwhite Jr., whose company is here. He doesn't plan to move it, but he personally is now a Florida resident. And John Hazenwhite's been very clear about this. He said, if I died tomorrow, we'd have to sell the company for me to fulfill the inheritance tax. So I think there might be a little movement on that to it's the opposite of millionaire's tax. It's raising the threshold so that you don't get taxed so heavily when you die.
Huh. Steph, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley has said he plans to ask the General Assembly to allow him to raise the city's property tax beyond the 4% cap to pay for a settlement agreement with the school department. What do legislative leaders have to say about that idea?
They haven't committed one way or another, but typically they defer to the delegation from a particular city and town if they're asking to have permission to raise taxes beyond the cap. If I may just explain what this means.
Please do.
So Providence right now can't raise taxes this year beyond, it's roughly 15 million, 4% of their total taxes raised the previous year. But the city has a pension payment they have to make that goes up every year. Just like any city, they've got union raises that they have to give. And now, because of this court decision, they have to find millions of dollars more for the Providence School District, not just this year, but in the out years, assuming that the schools stay under a state takeover for the next couple of years. So that's why taxes might go up in Providence. Now, the great debate is going to be maybe they could cut the budget and avoid a tax increase. It's also a revaluation year in Providence this year. So home values will go up. If they get permission from the General Assembly to go above the cap, depending on how your home value changes, it could be a really
It's a lot of
big,
moving parts.
Yeah.
It's a lot of moving parts. It could be a really big tax increase for some people.
Some people could really get zapped. Jim, what action do we expect the legislature to take regarding the Washington Bridge?
Well, I'd like to see them step up a little bit more. We have heard that there are going to be some oversight hearings. And, the governor's whole thing is, well, we really can't talk about this because it's in litigation. I would love, and I think a lot of Rhode Islanders would like to say, okay, let's subpoena in some of the top DOT officials, have them put up their hand and then say, I can't talk about this. I want faces. I want names. I want higher level people. We've kind of floated that around. And let's get some accountability, even if it's to put them in a public setting to say, well, I really can't talk about this because whatever. Okay, we know who this guy is and this guy is and this woman is here.
Because we did have oversight hearings when initially, and I'm not
It was
sure.
one oversight hearing
LBD.
that really didn't produce
I didn't
much.
get a lot out of that.
Yeah, the speaker said there's going to be another one in January.
Yeah. So, Steph, what did legislative leaders say about the prospects of finally overhauling the Access to Public Records Act?
Well, Speaker Shekarchi said the public doesn't care about this. I would say the public might not know that APRA exists, but they know they want information. And the news media is the conduit through which we report on things like the Washington Bridge. The public certainly knows that they want to know what happened with the Washington Bridge. They might not realize that it is through the Access to Public Records Act that we obtain that information. And so, we, of course, do not support or endorse any particular legislation or any particular iteration of this bill, but it hasn't been updated in more than a decade. And there are certain things like, legislators' emails continue to be exempt. And there's a lot of issues lately with the governor's administration charging fees for requests, which has not been customary in the past. And so neither the Shekarchi nor Ruggiero really committed to whether there's going to be APRA reform this year.
Yeah, Ruggiero said it might pass.
He said it might pass, but he didn't seem too familiar with the details of the bill and what was being worked on. So we'll see if it becomes a priority during the session.
I think if you're using public funds, you're doing the public's business, and you're a public official, why aren't those emails available to us?
Yeah, people aren't writing with quill pens anymore. It's emails. And you raise a good point, Steph. The journalists are doing it on behalf of the public. Steph, Jim, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Rhode Island Report is a production of the Boston Globe in collaboration with Rhode Island PBS. Today's episode was produced by Megan Hall. Audio mixing and mastering by Marissa Ewing of Hemlock Creek Productions. Our music is from APM. Be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. See you next week. Looking to binge watch all your favorite PBS shows? You need Rhode Island PBS Passport, Masterpiece, Antiques Roadshow, Rhode Island PBS Weekly, and many more. Watch them all, anytime, and from any streaming device.